almost every Australian knows Old Parliament House and its role in our political and social history.
It's the symbol of a nation united in a democratic way of life.
And its importance.
She came as the living symbol of the unity of Crown and people.
It is an iconic Australian asset.
Nothing will save the Governor-General.
It was designed as a place for the people.
Aboriginal embassy erected outside Parliament House.
Thousands of Australian families have gathered together for the preservation of our democratic system.
It is critical that an institution like this survives and thrives, and we should never take it for granted.
There was a lot of police presence.
It was a crime scene, it was dangerous.
Quite shocking footage seeing the whole front on fire.
The fire damage was extraordinary.
Total devastation.
The soot and smoke burst into that big Kings Hall area.
The ceiling was black.
The fire had taken out the top layer.
It was heartbreaking for us all.
Good evening. One of the nation's most cherished buildings, Old Parliament House, has been set on fire during ugly protests today in Canberra.
They had painted over the glass on the doors. Tensions were that high outside. Honestly, I thought they were just going to push the doors down. I didn't, nobody really thought of that they were going to burn down.
It was quite surreal to see a fire brigade officer in the lower gallery who I could barely see through the smoke. It was so thick. The police attempted to put the fire out outside. They went out with a fire extinguisher. But that was unsuccessful. This institution has an important role in supporting the health of our democracy. It would be just unthinkable to let it deteriorate and not be restored as authentically as we possibly could.
We are a nationally heritage listed building, a Commonwealth heritage listed building. That means when something like a disaster happens, like a fire, all of those heritage management tools that we have on a routine basis for different projects, they actually come into play with how we make decisions about the fire remediation. Heritage requires consideration of what makes this building valuable. So you're looking to kind of retain what's there, fix it if you can, and not just rip up and replace. The scale of that work was enormous.
I walked in the back door and within probably 5 metres I could start to see soot coloration on various different points, and as I got closer and closer to the front door it just became more and more kind of shocking. All the objects on display in all the display cases, the actual signage for each one of those display cases all had soot on it. All the signs around the building saying turn left here or this is where you go to the toilets, all the walls, the ceilings black all the way through into the building. Anything that was varnished was, you know, you touch it with your finger, it'd come off. So all the timber work, all the inlay, the fabrics, the curtains, the blinds, the sculptures, anything brass that was, it's often treated with a wax, and wax just loves soot. Each one of these light fittings and the clocks and alarms all had to be cleaned individually by hand. And as you can see, they're made of timber, metal and glass. And each one of those materials needed a slightly different cleaning agent. So it was a really complicated process of working out how to clean each one of those surfaces. We had to develop a technique to show the extent of the soot through the building because it was just so hard to believe that it would go so far. So what we ended up doing is taking little cotton swabs and just went through the building, cotton swabbing little spots here and there to work out which rooms were most contaminated and least contaminated through the entire building. It was sad to see that there were certain sections of the building or certain items that were never ever going to be recovered, and trying to work out how we were going to be able to replicate them exactly with the right patina, using the correct materials. That was, my mind just went into overdrive.
Immediately adjacent to the front door, where burning embers and things had fallen through onto the floor, the timbers were burned and charred. Beyond that, it was all water damage. And unfortunately, the original floor was actually, it was a parquetry floor, but it was laid in a floorboard style, which meant it had tongue and groove joints in all the boards. It had been sanded a number of times in its life, which if you can imagine, that's the groove and the tongue goes in. This top part of timber had been made thinner and thinner to the point in many cases it was only 1 or 2 mils thick. So then when it got wet, those little bits of timber all flipped up all over the floor. So the only option was to lift it and replace it. We went to a lot of trouble to recreate the exact pattern of blocks. So where there was a short block at the start of the run, we tried to keep all of those elements exactly as they were. The character of the floor was that it was a bit battered, like it wasn't a brand new, shiny, flat floor. So we were trying to balance creating a new floor that would work with the rest of the building, because this main staircase and the adjacent staircases were not being replaced. We were able to retain those. There are stories embedded in the fabric, and so in this instance we were having to replace the fabric, but we made an effort really to retain the stories that were there, the stories of where, what kind of timber they came from, the stories of the people who laid it. Those stories and the involvement of all sorts of ordinary people over time in this building is still reflected in that floor.
I first saw the doors when we came down to actually do the removal a few weeks after the fire had actually happened, and it was very badly damaged. The fire had really just taken out the top layer. We knew that that outer element couldn't be saved, but in essence, when you peeled that away, there was still, the majority of the doors were still there. Where the glass had smashed out from the heat, the flames had licked through and around the corners, so then all of the edges around all the glazing openings, they all had to be patched. There was a lot of careful decision-making in which bits to remove, which bits were necessary to remove, and which pieces we could keep. And we kept as much as we possibly could.
The doors had a number of changes throughout their life, which we kind of considered when we were looking at the conservation of them as to whether or not to take the doors back to how they existed in a previous period of history, or to restore them to how they were in December last year.
If we'd come along and said, the door's too far gone, we could have stuck up some nice steel doors that could have been made to look nice, but wouldn't have been in keeping, and people would know then that they're not original and they're not made of the original fabric. The fabric of the building is what is there to tell those sort of intangible stories.
Those doors have witnessed so much, and that is a tremendous thing to keep, and that is a tremendous thing to hold on to. And so, yes, it would have been easier to replace the doors, but to work on those and to see those back and to think what they have witnessed is a beautiful thing.
Many people contacted us after the doors, the building were damaged in the fire. I think because those doors are symbolic to many people of the entrance to our democratic history, in a sense. Key events happened through those doors, in front of those doors, and behind those doors. We're grateful to the work that's been done to restore them and very happy to have them open again.
Coming here provides an opportunity to engage with democracy in the historic place where democratic decisions were made over a significant number of years, from 1927 to 1988. It allows people to come and have a conversation about not only the decisions that were made in this building, the types of people that worked here and what their different roles were, but looking at how society has changed over time through the fabric, the material pieces that we can see.
It's been really nice having people back in the building, particularly sort of seeing the school kids being really engaged with the history of the place. You sort of see school children walking around King's Hall or into the chamber, and you can see the effect that has, and I think that's really special.
We all work in this building because we love the building. We all have a very good understanding, good training of the heritage value of the building. Australian democracy grew up in these rooms. It doesn't mean that everything that happened here was great and it's good, but it's where we've come from. And between 1927 and 1988, when it closed as Parliament, Australia as a nation completely changed.
Preserving this place emphasises to the people in Australia how important democracy is to us as a nation and why each one of us should value it.